Looking at Nehemiah again, so this is part 3 of the story of Nehemiah, a man of God and prayer and faith. And we've looked at that over 2 weeks, haven't we? 2 sessions, and this is the third session now. So let's start off with just a bit of a recap.
Last time we saw Nehemiah, God gave him favor with the powerful king Artaxerxes, and the king gave the cupbearer permission to go to Jerusalem to plan, and lumber to build Jerusalem's gates. So Nehemiah set out for Jerusalem to inspect the city and see what work needed to be done. The humble cupbearer traveled alone and inspected all of the city gates that were burned down. He walked around all of the broken down walls. Day and night he walked the city, examining the damage and praying about what needed to be done. Finally, after all his examining, the humble cupbearer arose and spoke to the exiles in the city, and he boldly said, "Let's build the walls of Jerusalem together, so that other nations will not take advantage of us anymore. The hand of our God has been favorable to me. He heard my prayer, and the king of Persia himself has sent me here before you today, and he's already given us lumber to rebuild our gates." Together the people replied, "Let us arise and build." And so together they planned the work to rebuild Jerusalem's walls and gates, all according to the orders that God had given Nehemiah, the humble cupbearer.
Right. So, over the past week, or the last time we looked at this, we saw that Nehemiah, before he approached the king, had to be patient. He had to choose his right moment to speak to the king and unburden his heart. And actually he had to wait 4 months, so that's quite a fair amount of time he had to wait there. But not only that, he had the faith to unburden what he wanted to say to the king, in order that the king would let him go. Remember, the king could have quite easily just chopped his head off if the king didn't like what Nehemiah is saying. So a lot of prayer went into that, but not only prayer, he needed to get the timing right in order that the king would respond. And of course he had to prepare, he had to have a plan. So not only he just prayed, but he planned what he was going to say, and he planned what he was going to do, and that he put through the king, and that was received exceptionally well, because the king gave him the means to travel to Jerusalem with a protection detail and with materials to get this job done. But of course, as soon as he gets to Jerusalem, there he's going to run into opposition, and we saw the names of 3 people and groups of people that thought, oh, this is not a good idea, with the walls of Jerusalem being rebuilt, because that would obviously affect them. In fact, it would take away their power, and I suspect their income. So they was going to do everything in their power to stop Nehemiah organising the people of Jerusalem to rebuild the walls. So when he arrived, Nehemiah just arrived, settled in, and then at night he went out and inspected the walls to order that he could finalise his plans and prepare himself to address the people. And I like that thing that we said last night. Nehemiah saw more at night than the residents did in the daylight, for he saw the potential as well as the problems. So that was the background to chapters 1 and 2, and we're going to move on now in the story. Nehemiah, we are told, didn't tell everybody what he was doing until he had been there the first few days. The officials did not know where I had gone or what I was doing, because yet I had said nothing to the Jews or the priests or the nobles or the officials or any others who would be doing the work. Then I said to them, "You see the trouble we are in. Jerusalem lies in ruins, and its gates have been burned with fire. Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem, and we will no longer be in disgrace." I also told them about the gracious hand of my God on me and what the king had said to me. They replied, "Let us start building." So they began this good work. I answered them, saying, "The God of heaven will give us success. We his servants, will start rebuilding. But as for you, you have no share in Jerusalem or any claim or historic right to it." That's Nehemiah answering the critics, Sandbach and co, about the city. He said, God had called them to rebuild the city walls, and it's now time for you to move over, because God has decided it's time for you to stand aside and for us to regain God's holy city. The first thing I want to say about this is when we look at it, is that Nehemiah was not only a great leader, he was also a team player. And I think that's very important for us to understand as we go through this story. Chapter 3, which I'm not reading today, because it's a long list of people and families, church sort of organisation, temple organisations that came together to build this. Nehemiah realised that this wasn't a task just for him to employ people, if you like, to rebuild the walls. It was a task for the whole community. And God had called him to build people together into a team to do it. As a team, they could do it. As individuals, or as individual groups, it couldn't be done. And as the story progresses, we will see that. It's amazing. They actually rebuilt the walls once they started in 52 days, which was a great miracle that was going on. But it showed that Nehemiah got the entire city of Jerusalem and the people who lived outside of Jerusalem, the Jewish people that were still in around there and still owed sons allegiance to God, he got them all involved, and together the job got done. That was a great miracle. So we need to recognise that, and I think that's still true of the church today. The church is not being rebuilt by an odd group here or there, or an odd leader there. It needs everybody to be involved in some way, because together we can do great things to rebuild the kingdom of God. And we have to confess straight away that we're not good at that. We are not good at that. Sadly, we have to confess that. I often think of the time I spent down in Southampton with my first full-time ministry. The church I was in was an ecumenical church. There was a certain amount of hub of the churches together came around our particular church there, and we was part of the trading estate, if you like, in Lord's Hill, in Southampton, the Lord's Hill area. The church was next door to Sainsbury's and one or two other big places, with a big car park around, and it was the centre for the community. Ours was a little ecumenical church. We had about 60 to 70 members during the time we was there, and around there were other churches. There was a big Church of England there with about 250 members in the congregation each week. There was a big evangelical church that was about 300 people that was just up the road. There was a Pentecostal church down the road with just about 50 members like us. And there was a big Roman Catholic church that had about 800 people come through its doors on a weekend. So if you've got us all together, worshipping people on a Sunday, it worked out about 1,200 people that regularly you would say were, worshipping Christians in this community. And one of the things we did together was to organise a Good Friday service outside Sainsbury's. We got Sainsbury's permission to hold the service in the promenade outside their main entrance there, where loads of other shops as well. Everybody was happy for us to come along there, sing a few hymns, and somebody would get up and give a very short message. And I can remember after being there a couple of years, really trying to enthuse the churches together to come along and support this event. Because when I first went there was only about 50 people, Jews, and most of those were Lord's Hill Church, the smallest church out of all of them. And I didn't have to persuade the Bishop of Winchester to come along to this one year. And I said to the other church leaders, it would be good if we came and supported this. Because I said, I'm pretty sure that if we got 1,000 people outside the door of Sainsbury's singing a few hymns and the bishop getting up and saying a few words, we would be noticed. To all those people who want to go shopping on a Good Friday. Lord's Hill community was about 12,000 people, about 6,000 dwellings. Most of the people from these churches would shop at Sainsbury's. And the most we ever got there was 80 people, in amongst the thousands that went shopping. And we really didn't get noticed. Sad thing. But if we'd all been there, we certainly would have been noticed. They might have had a job to get in the car park for a start. So we have to confess, we are not good team leaders. I like this quote from Warren Wiersbe. No one person could have accomplished the work of repairing the walls and restoring the gates. It took leadership on Nehemiah's part and cooperation on the part of the people. Each had a place to fill with a job to do. So it is with the church today. We must work together if we are to finish the work of the glory of God. Oh, so true. We need to recognise that all people, God's people, must come together. And as long as the people of Jerusalem were content with living in a city that looked like a bomb site, then that was not good. Yes, they wouldn't have any opposition to that. And Nehemiah overcome the problem with the community to say, well, if we go forward with this, we're going to have opposition, but it can be done, and in the end, we will see God's glory and we will live better lives. There's no two ways about that. Opposition is a sign, really, that God's blessing is on us, and it is an opportunity to build his kingdom. So we must remember that. So anyway, let's go back to the building. Who's got experience of having building works? Most of us. Now, I don't know about you, I've had 2 or 3 good building works and they've gone well. My son's had 2 building works in the houses he's lived in, and they've been an absolute disaster. Problems. Works that should have taken 4 weeks have taken 3 months, and the costs have gone up double in some cases, because once the builders have been put off, the extra trouble's been found. There's always can be trouble with building works. It's just one of those things that happens, isn't it? And have you experienced that? Yeah.
Good and bad, both.
Good and bad, we can. Building works are known problems, and building the walls of Jerusalem going to be no different. There are actually, I'm going to look at, there's 9 things that cause problems with the building works. We're going to look at 4 things this week that we're going to see. Firstly, that they were going to be subject to ridicule. Secondly, once the wall's got underway, the opposition started to tell everybody there was going to be wars and armies were going to be massing. And those 2 things led to the people being discouraged and living in fear. So, you know, those were the things that were going to happen. So 9 things, we're going to look at 4 things that we're going to look at this week. And none of these things on themselves could cause the work to stop, but put together there was quite a lot of possibilities that could be. I'm going to show you a clip from a film now about ridicule. I hope this is going to... But there's a situation where the people were being ridiculed, weren't they? They was being ridiculed. And you can just imagine, very difficult to live in this. You've got this powerful, oppressive army there, ridiculing and mocking the people. And that can lead to all sorts of things. And this is the sort of thing that the people were experiencing when the Jews were starting to rebuild the wall. When Sanballat heard that they were rebuilding the wall, he became angry and was greatly incensed. He ridiculed the Jews, and in the presence of his associates and the army of Samaria, he said, "What are those feeble Jews doing? Will they restore their wall? Will they offer sacrifices? Will they finish in a day? Can they bring the stones back to life from those heaps of rubble, burned as they are?" Tobiah, the Amorite, who was at his side, said, What are they building? Even a fox climbing up on it would break down their wall of stones. So quite mocking words in these opening verses of this 4th chapter. Somebody once said, it's easy to dodge bullets than bravely stand in the face of laughter. I think that's quite true in that sense. That we struggle when we get mocked. And Christians are open to mockery and laughter and being made jokes of all the time, aren't they? And it's a good way of defeating the enemy so the bullies sink. And it's been tried on ever since the beginning of the world, really. Think of how Goliath tried to ridicule and mock David when he went out to do battle with him. You know, and think how the soldiers, Pilate's soldiers, tried to mock Jesus before he went to the cross. There's lots of situations that caused mockery that went out to defeat the rebuilding of the wall. We must remember that as Christians today. And the other thing, of course, that I think they noticed, they saw these people, ordinary people. They were builders trying to rebuild the wall. Imagine it, they didn't have the right equipment to start off with. All they had was their hands and their own strength. And I expect they had a few mishaps as well. And yet Sanballat and his opposition stood there and laughed at them. And even though they knew Nehemiah came with letters of authority, they accused him of rebelling against the king architects and said they were going to write to the king and question the king and all the rest of it. So there was a great amount of problems welling out from just a mockery and a ridicule. And how did Nehemiah respond to this? Well, he prayed and he asked for a way to see through this. You see that when they began to rebuild this wall, it was easy for Sanballat with his Samaritan army to accuse Nehemiah of going against the will of the king. But the Lord heard the prayers of Nehemiah and knew what was going on, and providing the people kept at the task, they would see the glory of God come back. Here's one of Nehemiah's prayers. Hear us, our God, for we are despised. Turn their insults back on their own heads. Give them over as plunder in a land of captivity. Do not cover up their guilt or blot out their sins from your sight, for they have thrown insults in the face of the builders. You know, there's that well-known saying, isn't it? Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words may never hurt me. One of the most untrue things perhaps we could ever say. I can remember people saying that to me as a child. But that's not true, is it? We know that's not true. Words are just as powerful to demoralise people as sticks and stones and whatever else. Words can help us. But Nehemiah found a way through prayer and encouragement to overrule what was going on and to keep the Jewish people from building the walls. And what happened was when Sanballat and Tobiah, the Arabs and the Amorites and the people of Ashdod heard that the repairs of Jerusalem walls had gone ahead and that the gaps were being closed, they became angry. I expect they got even angrier. So they plotted together to come up and fight against Jerusalem and stir up the troubles. And this is where we hear that the threats of war were coming in. As the people kept on building and making some progress and things were going well, they heard that people were building up armies to come and destroy them. Why? Well, because once the city walls went up, Jerusalem and the Jewish people there will become a strong nation again. And of course that's the last thing the opposition wanted. Sanballat and the Samaritans surrounded the north of the city. Tobiah and the Amorites were to the east. Geshem and the Arabs were to the south. And the Philistines were to the west. So they heard all these rumours, and of course, you know, it's not good to hear rumours, is it? In that sense, we knew. And so Nehemiah prayed again and found an answer to this. Well, we not only need to build, but we need to guard the city as well. And this is where Nehemiah come up with a masterstroke, really. He decided that we've got to keep on building, but we need to be protected. And so he started to say, well, some of the people need to be armed as well. You know, we'll post guards on the city wall, we'll put them up in the high places, so the enemy's spies would see that the people were not only building the wall, but they were prepared to fight to defend the city. What a great strategic moment. And of course, that sent a signal out to Nehemiah's enemies that the wall was going to be continually built. But that didn't discourage the opposition, because we learned that the next thing that happened as they started to build and guard this wall, the people got discouraged. Well, this is what happens in verse 10. Meanwhile, the people in Judah said, "The strength of the labourers is giving out, and there is so much rubble that we cannot rebuild the wall." Also our enemies said, "Before they know it or see it, we will be right there among them and will kill them and put an end to the work." So the enemy was starting to spread rumours. Well, it doesn't matter, you can have a few guards up there, but we're going to infiltrate you while you're working and then get you with surprise, attack you by surprise. So Nehemiah prayed and thought about this again, and so comes up with another thing. "Therefore I stationed some of the people behind the lowest points of the wall at the exposed places, posting them by families, with their swords, spears and bows. After I looked things over, I stood up and said to the nobles, the officials and the rest of the people, 'Don't be afraid of them. Remember the Lord, who is great and awesome, and fight for your people, your sons and your daughters, your wives and your homes.'" So amongst this discouragement, Nehemiah provided more defence. And not only provided defence, what we believe he did is that he also brought in a rota. So some people will build and some people will be standing there waiting to defend. And then they'd have shifts of it and turn out. So in a way, the builder's got a bit of a rest. And that worked. That was something that really worked there as Nehemiah come out with a way. And in many ways that didn't slow the building down. That encouraged them to go on building, and they had more energy to prove the building. More people were provided with arms. More people were provided to build and what's name. So we need to remember that's like as we seek to rebuild the church here. You know, discouragement is a real weapon in Satan's armour. We could easily get discouraged with a few of us that gather here on a Sunday. We can't all be here every Sunday, can we, or others during the week. But we need to be encouraged through our prayers and the ways we support each other in community and as friends, that we are able to build the kingdom. We mustn't be put off by the sense of the task out there. God knows it. If you think about when Moses came to invade the promised land for the first time, some people from within the community said, "Oh, we can't conquer that land, it's too big for us." And because of that lack of faith, they were kept in the desert for another 40 years. But Nehemiah was one who kept on encouraging the people to work and defend, and to remember that if they kept on, they would overcome the enemy. And in verse 10 he says, "And then I looked over the situation. I called together the nobles and the rest of the people and said to them, 'Don't be afraid of the enemy. Remember the Lord, who is great and glorious, and fight for your brothers and sisters.'" But of course then that sense of fear came over them at the same time as this discouragement. And we all know about fear. It comes along with lots of other things when we feel that the enemy is getting us. And we need to remember that the battles are not just fought in our domain, are they? They're fought in the heavenlies. There is a spiritual war as well as an ordinary war going on in this world. And we need to remember that as we go on. So Nehemiah overcome this discouragement and fear by encouraging people to get on, to bringing in a shift system, bringing in regular changing of the guards, making sure everybody had their weapons near at hand, and he encouraged them to keep on building. And we see at one stage half the people were defending and half stood guard. And of course all the women and children would have been involved in keeping the workers fed and everything else. And other people, perhaps who couldn't do much, they just stood on the walls and acted as a guard. And Nehemiah said to them, you know, you will be warned now. We've got a good warning system out. And he stationed men with trumpets around the wall. And if anybody felt that the enemy was coming, they would send runners to Nehemiah. He would sound off the trumpet, and that trumpet call would echo all the way round the wall, so people would be prepared. So Nehemiah was a great leader, a great encourager, and a great team player. And we need to play all those parts. In many ways here, we're all leaders, we're all team players. We all need to encourage one another in the work that we're doing to build God's kingdom here in Caversham. We don't work on our own, we don't seek to do this, we're just his labourers. And God will build his kingdom through us in Caversham. Let's remember that through the difficulties of our time. So, we carry on with more building works next week in our series of A Man of God, a Man of Prayer